Your photos are on a revenge site, the detective said quietly. 7 of them, posted 3 weeks ago. The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. We're investigating, but I need to ask you something difficult. My name is Norayina Berry, and this is the story of how my most private moments became a weapon used against me by someone I trusted completely. This is about the violation that went far deeper than anyone could understand, and what I had to do to survive it. I was 48 years old when my world fractured into pieces that would take years to reassemble. The photos weren't explicit in the traditional sense. They were intimate, private, taken during a moment of vulnerability with someone I thought loved me. They showed me in moments only meant for one person's eyes. Soft lighting, vulnerable expressions. The kind of images you keep hidden because they represent trust, intimacy, and a version of yourself that only one person should ever see. My ex-husband Daniel had taken those photos during our marriage. We'd been separated for 2 years, divorced for 1. He'd moved on, or so I thought. I'd moved on too. I had my own apartment, my own life, my own identity that wasn't wrapped up in his anger or his control. But apparently, he'd been planning something far more sinister than I ever imagined. The detective's name was Marcus Webb. He sat across from me in the small interview room at the police station, his expression carefully neutral. He'd seen this before. Too many times. But that didn't make it easier for me to hear. The site is called exposetruth.com, he said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It's one of several revenge porn platforms. Users upload intimate images of ex-partners without consent. The stated purpose is to shame them, to punish them, to destroy their reputation. I couldn't look at the paper. The words alone made my skin crawl. How many people have seen them? I asked. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. That's difficult to determine, Marcus said. These sites get thousands of visitors daily, but the important thing is that we can trace the upload. The IP address belongs to a residence in Portland. We believe it's your ex-husband's apartment. Daniel. Of course it was Daniel. The man who'd spent our entire marriage making me feel small, making me doubt myself, making me question my own sanity. The man who'd monitored my phone, my friendships, my bank account. The man who'd convinced me that everything wrong in our marriage was my fault. When I finally left him, I thought I'd escaped. I thought the worst was behind me. I was so naive. We need to know if you want to press charges, Marcus continued. This is a felony in this state. Distribution of intimate images without consent. We have enough to make an arrest, but we need you to be willing to testify. Testify? That meant going to court. That meant seeing Daniel's face across a courtroom. That meant having lawyers and judges, and potentially a jury, knowing exactly what he'd done. Seeing the violation laid bare in legal documents and evidence logs. That meant my private agony becoming public record. But the alternative was letting him win. Letting him destroy me from a distance and face no consequences. I want to press charges, I said. My hands were steady on the table. I was proud of that. Marcus nodded. Okay, here's what happens next. What happened next was a blur of legal procedures, victim advocacy services, and the slow realization that my ex-husband had been planning this for months. The detective showed me evidence of his communications with other men on the revenge site. He'd written detailed descriptions of me alongside the photos. He'd included my name, my workplace, my social media accounts. He'd done everything he could to make sure the images were connected to my real identity. The goal was clear: destroy me. I learned that Daniel had been saving those photos throughout our marriage specifically for this purpose. He'd told me he was deleting them when I asked him to. He'd lied. He'd kept them as insurance, as leverage, as a future weapon. When I left him, he activated that weapon. The first person who found the images was my mother. She called me, her voice shaking, asking if I'd seen something online. She wouldn't tell me what. I knew immediately. My stomach dropped before I even searched. I knew what I would find. I didn't want to look. I forced myself to anyway. The images were there, exactly as Marcus had described. My private moments displayed for strangers to consume, to comment on, to judge. The comments were vicious. Men rating my body, men making crude jokes, men sharing the images to other platforms. The violation wasn't just that the photos existed online, it was that they'd been weaponized. They'd been turned into a tool for abuse, for harassment, for destruction. I called my workplace's HR department the next morning. I had to tell them what was happening before they heard about it from someone else, before a client saw the images and made assumptions about my character, before my professional reputation was destroyed along with my personal one. The HR director, a woman named Sylvia, listened to my explanation with visible discomfort. She told me the company would support me. She told me they took this seriously, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. I could see her mentally assessing the liability, the PR risk, the potential damage to the company's image. "We'll need to document this," Sylvia said carefully, "for our records, in case there are any inquiries from clients or media." Media. The word hung in the air like a threat. If the media got hold of this story, my nightmare would become public spectacle. My violation would become entertainment for strangers on the internet. I started receiving messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old friends, former colleagues, people who'd found the images and felt compelled to tell me they'd seen them. Each message was a fresh wound. Each notification was a reminder that I'd lost control of my own image, my own narrative, my own body. One message came from my college roommate, Rachel. She wrote, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I saw the images on a forum someone posted about. I wanted you to know that I immediately reported them and told everyone I could that this was non-consensual. You're not alone in this." I cried reading that, not because of the violation, I was past crying about that, but because someone had stood up for me. Someone had taken action. Someone had refused to participate in the consumption of my abuse. Detective Webb called me 2 weeks after the initial report. They'd arrested Daniel. He'd been taken into custody at his apartment. The evidence was overwhelming. The IP address, the upload timestamps, the communications with other users on the site, it all pointed directly to him. "He's been charged with 3 felonies, Marcus told me. Distribution of intimate images without consent, cyberstalking, and harassment. His bail hearing is scheduled for next week." I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet, but the beginning of a sense that this might actually have consequences, that Daniel might actually face punishment for what he'd done. The bail hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I didn't plan to attend. I couldn't face him, but my victim advocate, a woman named Keisha, encouraged me to consider it. "It helps the judge see the human impact," Keisha explained. "When the victim is present, it reminds everyone that this isn't abstract. It's real harm done to a real person." I agreed to go. I dressed carefully that morning, professional, strong. I chose a navy blazer and dark jeans. I did my makeup with precision. I was going to walk into that courtroom and show Daniel that he hadn't broken me, that he hadn't won. The courthouse was colder than I expected. The marble floors echoed with footsteps. I sat in the gallery, 3 rows behind, where Daniel would be brought in. Keisha sat beside me, her presence a small anchor in the storm. When they brought Daniel out, he looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished. He wore an orange jumpsuit and his hands were cuffed. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered why he was there. Then I remembered the photos. Then I remembered the violation. His attorney argued for his release on his own recognizance. They claimed he had no prior criminal history, that he was a valued member of the community, that he posed no flight risk. The prosecutor countered with evidence of his premeditation, his deliberate cruelty, his calculated attempt to destroy me. The defendant systematically saved intimate images throughout his marriage specifically to use as a weapon after the relationship ended, the prosecutor said. He then uploaded those images to a public platform and took steps to ensure they were connected to the victim's real identity. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated revenge. The judge looked at Daniel with barely concealed disgust. Bail is set at $50,000. You are to have no contact with the victim. You are to surrender your passport. You are to submit to electronic monitoring. Daniel's face flushed with anger. He'd expected to walk out of there. He'd expected the system to protect him, as it so often does. He'd expected to face minimal consequences for his cruelty. I watched him being led away and felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. But it was the beginning of accountability. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of relief and continued violation. The images remained online. Daniel's arrest didn't automatically remove them from the revenge site. It took legal action, cease and desist letters, and complaints to the platform's hosting service to get them taken down. Even then, I knew they existed in screenshots, in downloads, in the digital memory of strangers who'd already seen them. My therapist, Dr. Amelia, helped me process the layers of trauma. Not just the violation of having my images shared, but the deeper betrayal of having my trust weaponized. Daniel had spent years making me feel worthless, making me doubt myself, making me believe that I was the problem in our marriage. Then he'd taken my most vulnerable moments and turned them into a tool of abuse. This is a form of sexual violence, Dr. Amelia explained during one session. Even though there was no physical contact, the violation is just as real. You've been stripped of agency over your own image, your own body, your own narrative. I nodded, understanding on a cellular level what she was saying. I'd known it intellectually, but hearing it from her, having it validated by a professional, made something shift in me. This wasn't my fault. This wasn't something I'd caused or deserved. This was a deliberate act of cruelty by someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of making me feel small. The trial was scheduled for 4 months later. 4 months of waiting, of anxiety, of trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy while knowing that this reckoning was coming. 4 months of checking the revenge site obsessively, even though I knew the images had been removed. 4 months of jumping at every notification, every message, every unexpected email. My support system became my lifeline. Rachel came to stay with me for a week. My mother called every evening. Keisha checked in regularly with updates on the case. Dr. Amelia increased my therapy sessions to twice a week. These people became my anchor, my proof that I wasn't alone in this nightmare. I also started documenting everything. Every message I received, every screenshot I found of my images being shared elsewhere. Every piece of evidence that Daniel's actions had caused real, measurable harm. I created a file on my computer labeled Evidence. I knew I might need to reference these things during testimony. The thought of testifying terrified me. I'd have to describe the photos. I'd have to explain what they showed, where they were taken, who took them. I'd have to relive the moment I discovered them online. I'd have to do all of this with Daniel watching, with his attorney questioning my credibility, with a room full of strangers listening to the most intimate details of my violation. Dr. Amelia helped me prepare. We did mock testimony sessions where she played the role of the prosecutor and then the defense attorney. We practiced breathing techniques. We talked about grounding strategies I could use if I became overwhelmed on the stand. "Remember," Dr. Amelia said, "you're not testifying to convince Daniel. He knows what he did. You're testifying to convince the judge and jury. You're testifying to establish that this crime caused real harm." The trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in March. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn to the bail hearing. I wanted to feel strong. I wanted to project the image of a woman who would not be broken by this. The prosecutor, a woman named Jennifer, walked me through my testimony carefully. She asked me to describe the photos. I did, my voice steady even as my insides twisted. She asked me to explain when they were taken. I told her. She asked me how I found out they were online. I described the detective's call, the search I'd forced myself to conduct, the moment I saw my private moments displayed for strangers. "How did that make you feel?" Jennifer asked. I paused. That was the question that would define the emotional impact of the crime. I could have said violated. I could have said angry. I could have said destroyed. Instead, I said, like I'd lost ownership of my own body, like someone had taken something that belonged only to me and given it away to the world, like I'd been assaulted, even though no one had physically touched me. Jennifer nodded. She let that statement hang in the courtroom for a moment before moving on. Then came the cross-examination. Daniel's attorney was a man named Robert, and he was exactly what I'd expected. He questioned whether I'd given consent to the photos being taken. He suggested that perhaps I'd shared them with others, that perhaps I'd uploaded them myself for attention. He tried to paint me as someone who'd willingly created intimate images and was now playing the victim. I felt my hands start to shake. I set them flat on the table in front of me, pressing them down hard to keep them still. I did not consent to those images being shared, I said firmly. I did not upload them. I did not share them. My ex-husband took them without my knowledge of his intention to use them as a weapon, and he uploaded them to a revenge porn site designed specifically to humiliate and harass women. Robert tried several more angles of attack. He questioned my credibility. He suggested that perhaps I was misremembering details. He implied that I had ulterior motives for pressing charges. But I didn't budge. I stuck to the facts. I stuck to the truth. When I left the stand, Jennifer squeezed my arm. "You did great," she whispered. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Other witnesses testified. Forensic experts explained the digital evidence. A psychologist discussed the psychological impact of non-consensual image sharing. Daniel's own testimony was a disaster for his defense. He claimed he'd uploaded the images as a joke, that he didn't understand how serious it was, that he'd been trying to get my attention. None of it mattered. The evidence was overwhelming. On a Thursday afternoon, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on all 3 counts. I was sitting in the gallery when the foreman read the verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. I felt Keisha's hand find mine. I felt tears on my face, though I wasn't sure when I'd started crying. Daniel's face went white. His attorney immediately began talking about appeals. But in that moment, in that courtroom, justice had been served. Not perfect justice, not the kind of justice that would erase the violation or undo the harm. But real, tangible accountability. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I submitted a victim impact statement. I wrote about the violation, the shame, the fear, the way my sense of safety had been shattered. I wrote about how I'd had to change my social media accounts, how I'd had to be careful about where I went, how I'd had to live with the knowledge that strangers had seen my most private moments. Daniel received 3 years in prison. The judge was clear in her reasoning. This crime represents a calculated, premeditated attempt to destroy another person. The defendant saved intimate images throughout his marriage specifically to use as a weapon. He then took deliberate steps to ensure maximum harm to the victim. This behavior cannot be tolerated. 3 years. It wasn't enough, in some ways. It wasn't enough to undo the violation. It wasn't enough to erase the images from the internet. It wasn't enough to give me back the sense of safety I'd lost. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong. It was punishment for his cruelty. I left the courthouse that day feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy, not healed, but lighter. The months that followed were about rebuilding. I started a support group for survivors of non-consensual image sharing. I met other women who'd experienced similar violations. We shared our stories, our strategies for recovery, our ways of reclaiming agency over our own narratives. There was power in that community. There was healing in knowing I wasn't alone. I also started working with a nonprofit that fights revenge porn and non-consensual image sharing. I helped other survivors navigate the legal system, report images to platforms, and find resources for healing. Every time I helped someone else, I felt a little bit of my own power returning. My workplace situation stabilized. Sylvia from HR checked in with me regularly. The company made a public statement supporting me and condemning non-consensual image sharing. They even implemented new policies around digital privacy and security for all employees. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. My relationship with my mother deepened. She'd been my rock through this entire nightmare. She'd listened without judgment, supported me unconditionally, and reminded me constantly that this wasn't my fault. I started having weekly dinners with her. We talked about everything: the trauma, the recovery, the future. Rachel remained my closest friend. She'd been there through the worst of it, and she continued to be there as I healed. We took a trip together 6 months after Daniel's sentencing. We went to the coast, to a small town where no one knew my story, where I could just be a woman on vacation instead of a victim of a crime. Standing on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but a sense that I was going to survive this. That I was going to rebuild, that the violation wouldn't define the rest of my life. Dr. Amelia and I continued working together, but the focus shifted. Instead of processing trauma, we started talking about building resilience, about reclaiming my sexuality, about learning to trust again. It was slow work. There were setbacks, but there was also genuine progress. A year after Daniel's arrest, I went on a date. A real date, with a man named Thomas who worked at my gym. I was terrified. I'd lost so much trust in my ability to judge people's character. I'd been married to someone who'd spent years manipulating me, and then he'd violated me in the most intimate way possible. How could I trust anyone ever again? But Thomas was patient. He understood what I'd been through. He didn't pressure me. He let me move at my own pace. And slowly, gradually, I started to believe that maybe not everyone was going to betray me. Maybe not everyone was going to weaponize my vulnerability. 2 years after Daniel's conviction, I moved to a new apartment. I wanted a fresh start, a place that didn't have memories of my marriage, a place that was entirely mine. I decorated it carefully, choosing colors and furniture that made me feel safe and strong. I hung art on the walls. I created a home that reflected who I was, not who I'd been shaped into being. I also changed my name professionally. I kept Norina Berry legally, but I started going by my middle name, Nina, at work and in certain social circles. It was a small way of reclaiming control over my identity. I got to decide who knew me as Norina and who knew me as Nina. I got to compartmentalize my life in a way that felt protective. The images occasionally still appeared online. People would find old copies on archive sites or shared on forums. Each time, I'd report them. Each time, I'd feel the violation anew, but less acutely. The wound was scarring over. It would never fully heal, but it was no longer an open gash. I started speaking publicly about my experience. I gave a talk at a local university about non-consensual image sharing and digital consent. I was interviewed by a journalist writing about revenge porn and its impact on survivors. I became a voice for others who couldn't speak, who were too ashamed or too afraid or too traumatized to tell their stories. Thomas proposed to me 3 years after we started dating. We were sitting on the same beach where I'd had that moment of realization that I was going to survive. He got down on one knee, and I said yes. I said yes to love. I said yes to trust. I said yes to a future that wasn't defined by what had been done to me. My mother cried. Rachel cried. Dr. Amelia cried when I told her during our session. These were the people who'd held me together when I was falling apart. These were the people who'd believed in my resilience when I couldn't believe in it myself. Today, I'm 45 years old. No, wait, I'm 51 now. Time has a strange way of moving when you're healing. I'm married to Thomas. We have a dog named Winston. I have a job that I love, doing work that matters. I have friendships that are based on genuine connection and mutual support. I have a life that's full and rich and real. The violation hasn't disappeared. It's part of my history now. It's part of what shaped me. But it's not the whole story. It's not the defining narrative of my life. I'm so much more than what was done to me. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still occasionally feel a spike of anxiety when I see a notification on my phone. I still have moments where I feel the weight of the violation, where I remember what it felt like to see my private moments displayed for strangers. But those moments are fewer and further between, and I've learned to move through them. I've learned that healing isn't linear. It's not something you complete and then move on from. It's something you do every single day, in small ways. It's choosing to trust again. It's choosing to be vulnerable again. It's choosing to believe that the violation doesn't get to define me. If you're reading this and you've experienced something similar, I want you to know you are not alone. This wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve this, and you can survive it. You can rebuild. You can reclaim your life. The road is long. The healing is hard, but it's possible. I'm proof of that. If you've been victimized by non-consensual image sharing, reach out to a trusted person, contact your local law enforcement, and seek support from organizations that specialize in helping survivors.